find out. Good evening, good day, good morning, and good night to whoever and wherever you are. My name is Ollie. I'm with Alan, and welcome to War on the Webway. Alan, say hello.
Hello everyone, good evening. Happy New Year.
Happy New
It's
Year.
the first it's the 1st of January today. This is when we're recording. And depending on how I can be bothered to upload this, it may be on tonight or it may next few days.
Hey,
Happy New Year to
we're a
everyone.
highly professional podcast right here with a definite upload schedule.
Yes, but anyway.
Happy New Year. So, Alan, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, tonight is quite a topical kind of like an episode, and it's going to be around: are we a difficult faction to play?
Yes.
Are we a faction that you need lots of experience to play, that you need lots of experience in the different phases of the game to play? Or are we a faction that you can literally buy 5 boxes and then go for it? We're going to kind of talk about that, discuss our viewpoints, and take it from there.
Sounds good. So part of why we think about this is like the Custodes win rates are really down at the moment, and people are kind of looking at them all over the place and going, Custodes must be like either need to be buffed massively or sometimes they're too OP or whatever it might be. And I contest this because I think in the right hands, Custodes are very, very strong. If you understand the trading, if you understand what they do, if you understand the core mechanics of what the army actually is, they're a super strong army, even with the current index. Now, there are bad matchups, and there are matchups where you're not going to get your hundreds, but they aren't, by any stretch of the imagination, a completely nerfed, terrible army. It comes down to whether or not you know the ins and outs. And I think this is why this is interesting. We're not trying to sort of rewrite the script or whatever. It's just giving our opinion to say, is it the mechanics? Is it the game? Is it 10th edition? Is it potentially a player or players? We spoke about it, touched on it briefly, but we are very different players. And I think this is where this will come interesting, because hopefully people will listen and side with one of us or the other one of us, or kind of see themselves in what we're going to kind of go through. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start with how Custodes lists build? Do you want to start with the model count? Do you want to start with where the game is? Where would you like to start?
Pretty much none of those. Let's start with the player base.
Player base, okay.
Because I think what's really interesting is every time that I kind of like read the, I'm interested to get kind of your opinion on this. Every time I read the, the stats or the the thing that comes out on Reddit, once a week or something.
Stats.
It always says, it always says, that the Custodes player base are abandoning the faction. And then you look at the number of players, and we used to have a significantly higher percentage of the player base overall that used to play Custodes. So I think probably that's the middle of our player of our players. So in other words, we're still getting the new people coming in because they think it's awesome. We're getting the people that are playing it for rule of cool, but not competitively. And then we're keeping the kind of like most competitive players who have had some success, the ones that are meta chasers. But all of the people in the middle sphere have been hit pretty hard by the data select nerfs and have kind of moved away to other factions they've had.
Yeah.
I mean, would you think that's a fair summary?
So I'm very aware and very cautious that I don't want to alienate people too early on in the podcast. That comes later on. But like it's not about necessarily beginnery players versus what I think that there isn't a Custodes meta list at the moment. So what you've got is you haven't got the meta chasers going down that route. So what I'm thinking is 9th edition with the Dreadnought spam, or the Warden blobs and the Advance and Charge Solar Watch blobs. Like, there isn't that army. And so what people either have to do is you either have to understand the fundamentals of what the army can do and build a list, like yourself. You know, this isn't trying to blow smoke here, Alan, but like yourself, you come second at RTT, 3-0. You regularly go 4-1. If not, try and push for a 5-0. You are a player who can get that. I think that when people then look online or look on Reddit, you can be quite heartbroken and be like, well, there's no good way to play Custodes. And I just don't think that's true. But because you haven't got top, quote-unquote, top players playing them, you're not seeing the lists that still work with the edition. You're not seeing the lists that can still play 10th. You're just seeing... and, you know, maybe this is where we'll get into, but there's so many lists that start with, I want 2 Brooks of Alaris, I want some Venatari and Trajan Valoris. And those are so different to what we would build. So different to what we would build. But everyone then on beginner chats or Facebook groups or Reddit or wherever else it might be that you get your bouncing your ideas behind, they always recommend the same sort of lists. And then somebody goes, oh, but it doesn't work for me. And then they get quite disheartened. And I think Custodes are a very, very strange army. You have so limited models, you have such limited assets that there's kind of there's no grey area with them. If you start off very, very strong, is in terms of the game, you can kind of build up points and rack up points and get them going quite quickly. If you start off very defensively, again, you can do the same sort of thing. If you lose 6 models, right, and most armies want to kill 6 models. If you lose 6 models in a Custodes list, that's 300 points. That's a sixth of your army gone. Like it's a huge swing for a Custodes player to kind of get beaten. And I think it only takes a couple of those people getting beaten that badly, maybe in a test game, for them not to go into a tournament, and then they don't play the army. And that's when I think you see this decline in player base. That's when you see these stats that look a bit funny. And I think, yeah, you're right. People are probably playing it as a beginner coming in, not really understanding. Well, maybe that's patronising, but maybe not understanding some of the fundamentals of the game, but loving Rule of Cool, the army. Or you're seeing those people who, in the rare cases, are faction specialists. And I just don't think you've got the number of people. The way that, say, Space Marines, for example. Space Marines release a codex, everyone and their mums is playing Space Marines. From high-end players to everybody, because everybody's got a Space Marine army. It feels like at sometimes everybody's got a Custodes army, and then it feels like other times nobody's got a Custodes army.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about that is because when our codex hit in 9th,
yes,
right, a lot of the top players switched on to Custodes because they were broken because of the strats. But I still remember looking and watching a couple of those games online, thinking, like, what is going on? Because I was looking at 9 bikes, three squads of 3 bikes that they were doing that secondary where you need to kill them. If you don't kill them, then your opponent get what was it, to the last or something? Yeah. And then they were doing the Inquisitor's psychic interrogation or something.
Yep, that was on.
And I remember thinking, that is just so one-dimensional. But as soon as that was nerfed, with the stratagems used on the dreadnoughts or on the bikes, sorry, they just disappeared from the faction.
Yeah,
and it left a core, like the kind of core. But you've got to look at it from the other side as well. You've got to look at it from the hobbying side, the modelling side, the game side. Like, we are the easiest models to paint, pretty much. In my opinion, because all you need to do, I mean, I'm the worst painter in the world here. I'm dreadful. But Retributor Gold, and then I buy the rest off eBay, already painted. Or I've got this commission painter that I use. He's absolutely amazing. But, anyway, models, you only need a few packs, and that's it. You need a few packs of models, and you know, what, 3 boxes of Guard, a couple of boxes of Wardens, maybe a box of Alaris. You compare that to some other factions. Say you wanted to, I really like Imperial Guard. Right now I need to buy 15 or 20 boxes.
Yeah.
It's nuts. So from a beginner standpoint, it's one, I think, that gets a lot of people into the game. However, I feel that it's not a action that can help those players grow, because it's very much if you put your unit slightly out of position, or you leave yourself open to an angle, and then it comes down to dice rolls. And as much as we joked about making 4-ups the time before,
Yep.
it's been an equal number of times where we haven't made a single 4-up.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
if you get a couple of those on the trot, then next thing you know is your love for that faction just disappeared.
Yeah.
Because you're getting hammered.
So, speaking from personal experience, I've had this. I've had exactly this. So, I started playing when I got back into it in 8th. I picked up Custodes. I'm a Chaos player. Was always a Chaos player when I was a kid. We spoke about my love of Chaos Space Marines, but Custodes were a few model count, and I could get the playing the game sooner with 20 models and work on another faction. That was always the plan. They were my gateway back into the army, into the game, and work on another faction. Now, I remember playing against a very lovely man, and if you are listening, Gavin, I do remember you. And he played guard, and it was literally he had a gun line, and I charged him with guard. It was literally endless waves of slaughter, and 3-4 games went like this, and I was like, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. I look back at my old Instagram posts, and I'm joking that, I might get a win tonight, and then follow up by, nope, still another loss. Because I was doing these waves, and it's only when I looked at Forge World, it's only when I spent some time understanding the army and the game and where the game was at the time, that I worked out a list, and I didn't lose to him again, I don't think, because I bought 2 Telemons that they went through Russes, everything else couldn't pick up my army, I could win the game. And so if I didn't have the disposable income to burn on Forge World at the time, I would have put down Custodes because I was so frustrated with those. So yeah, just speaking from experience, exactly what you said. That has been a real world experience for me. And
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never really had that. I've only, when I played previously, I was early teens, and then I seem to remember being around when Drukari were just released.
yeah,
And after that, I don't recall picking it up. I tried to pick it up a few times in my 20s,
yep,
and I never really found the community. And then when I hit my early 30s, that's when Custodes came out, and I was like, wow, I really like them. And then I managed to find the London Wargaming Guild,
yep,
which was the community that helped foster
yep,
my appreciation for the game, and then it kind of took me forward. So I do think that if I'd have just picked up Custodes without those other things around, the regular access to people to play, the variation of armies that you could play against, the regular tournaments nearby, I don't think I wouldn't have switched to another army, but I don't think I would have carried on playing the game.
yeah.
So I think, go on.
I was gonna say, it's really interesting because I think those weaknesses in Custodes from 8th, 9th, and even in 10th are still there. It's still the same weaknesses, and I would say that if you are somebody who is frustrated at Custodes, it could just be that the army isn't clicking. It could just be that, like, as it sounds so patronising, so apologies, but this is the advice that I gave to myself genuinely, and it's like, are you playing the same game trying to expect different results? Are you throwing your bodies away? Are you pushing up in an advanced way? Yes, right, that's not what the army does. And that was my frustration. That was where I was like, I don't understand why I can't make 4-ups. I don't understand why I'm paying all these points and I've got so few models. Or I bought... And I've got... Literally look at my shelves at the moment. I have things on there that I haven't played in 2 editions. That's almost 3 years. At one point I wanted 18 bikes for some reason, but I didn't ever use them. And some of my frustration comes from, 1, early days, a few model count, whatever. But 2, when people break my armies. So when everyone jumped on the bandwagon, I remember I started 9th when 9th Codex just came out. Just go jump back to that. I stopped playing Custodes for a bit because I was so bored of everyone playing them. And then what I got really bored with was people telling me that the army was broken. And I'll always remember this. Somebody was like gloating to me that said that the armor's broken, I took Grey Knights, and you've seen me play Grey Knights. I'm the world's worst Grey Knight player. I do not understand how Grey Knights work, and I got a draw against Custodes, and this was meta faction Custodes, and I don't know how to play Grey Knights. And the guy looked at me and was like, "How did that happen?" And I went, "Because the army isn't broken if you know what it does." I knew what it did, so I just took it apart, and I literally last dice roll, I should have gone 6 inches one way, I went 6 inches the other way, and he made a 8-inch charge. If I went 6 inches the other way, I'd have won the game. And I was like, but it was somebody who was jumping on the bandwagon a little bit, and I was like, "Oh, how long you play Custodes for?" "Oh, this is my first tournament with them." I was like, "Yeah, fine, okay. Let's see if I can play into these." And I did, and I got the draw.
It is interesting because I mean I kind of dodged that because my daughter was born like a month after the Codex came out, so I got one tournament in, and then after that I disappeared off the radar.
Yeah.
And came back after we'd been kind of addressed. So we were still quite strong,
Yeah.
But
It just
I
wasn't
avoided
broken,
it.
stupid strong. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and there'd been a few codexes, and ninth was a shock of a codex creep. So I do think I'm exactly the same as you. I lost. I thought to myself, oh, my baby's going to be born. Am I going to miss tournaments? Am I going to miss doing that for like the first 6 to 9 months?
Yeah.
I didn't miss it at all, really, because I had, so many people were playing the army, and I just didn't find that pull. What I do find the pull is in here now, in the moment where we are getting hammered left, right, and centre, and it's about trying to find that balance and that. I don't want to say magic list because a list doesn't actually. A list will give you the tools, but there's so many things a Custodes player needs to do outside of just putting the units on a list. But it's about finding that kind of right recipe for all of it put together in order to kind of to achieve something with the faction at the moment. And you know what it's like, when someone does well with a faction that's not flavor of the month.
Yep.
I'm always like, oh, nice one. Someone did really well with like Drukari, for example, in a tournament. And I'm thinking, oh, nice one. And I actually those are the things I actually go and read. Well, those are the things I actually go and watch because I know it's someone who's actually done something that is against what 90% of the people think is possible.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where I think I'll learn a bit more because I'm not going to be listening to or looking at the same. I mean, how many times on the Goonhammer list has it been, right, number 1, number 2, number 3, Eldari?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So
you
what did
know
we
what I
learn
mean?
this week? That Night Spinners are OP, that Wraithguard
Yeah.
are OP, and that if you can do Phantasm correctly at the right time, you win the game. Congrats.
Yeah, and it's so repetitive, and I think that's where Games Workshop probably dropped the ball a bit because I think if they were releasing into Index, which is what they did, they should have had a much faster Codex release schedule.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think
Yeah.
I think one of the funny things about the faction itself is that in a typical Custodes list, how many bodies would you have? We're talking rough numbers here. We're not talking about specific lists, but it's roughly between 24 and 30 if you're playing up at that level, right?
Pre-nerf, pre-days, like
Yeah,
minimum I would have would be 25.
25, right?
25 Custodes bodies.
Yeah. So
And that would include characters.
yeah, exactly. And so what I'm trying to get at here is you have 25 bodies, and if you're playing into Orc Hordes, for example, that could be 150 bodies. And I think that Games Workshop has really struggled to make 25 bodies stay on the board for 5 turns, or 4 turns, or 3 turns. And sometimes the balance in Custodes has been the wrong way with strat abuse or whatever it might be. But it's a hard balance. It's a really hard balance to do. And I think at the moment, a lot of the teeth, or a lot of the defence, and we've spoken about this before, but a lot of the defence has been taken away from the obvious defences. But there are lists that work. And I think... So, okay. I guess this is getting on to the next point that I kind of want to get into, which is what is Custodes? Like, how should people be looking at Custodes and playing them? Not necessarily playing against them, but you're a newish player. Let's say you've got some idea of 10th. You're a newish player, but you've not got any success with Custodes. What would you say to them as a thing to focus on? What would you say is a mechanic to go out and look at and understand to be a better player?
That's a good question. Tough question. Because
I can take my one if you want to have a couple of seconds.
yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Custodes for me are, even though they do damage in the shooting phase, they're a two-phase faction. Is my point, and I'll agree. I'll argue this and fight this and whatever. But realistically, they're a two-phase faction. If you put a Caladius tank in or something that can shoot, maybe there's a little bit of shooting. But really, it's the movement and the combat elements that make Custodes. So if I was a new player, if I was struggling, I would scour the rules for movement. I would scour the rules for combat, because those are the essential parts that you will lose a game on. I would look for pile-ins. I'd understand consolidations. I'd understand heroic interventions. I'd understand what extra movement and shenanigans and tricks you can do, because Custodes can move fast if you've got a blade champion attached with your once per battle advance and charge, or you've got Thesis Hunter, you can fall back and charge and do whatever that might be. But it's those mechanics there that I think people underestimate. And I see this all the time. I love the fight phase. I love the charge phase and the fight phase, personally, for 40k. And I'll play into World Eaters, and I'll be like, oh, why are you doing that? Well, after the game, obviously. And the guy's like, oh, is that not right? I was like, well, it is, but you could do this, or you could move your 3 inches more, or you can try and toe into cover. Like, the little bits and pieces that you see in the game that I'm sort of reciting verbatim, but that you see in the game, and those are where Custodes really shine. If you can get something into cover from a combat, then you're already on a one-up save, for example. It's those parts of it that I think I would reiterate and hammer home. And quite frankly, I know the fight phase very, very, very well from 8th and 9th and now 10th, because I had to, because that's the thing that interests me most about the army. So that would be my 10 seconds piece of advice for people. If you are...
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean...
I was just like, if you're sitting there and you're going, I do not understand this army, right? I'm playing Alaris and Wardens, and I've got Guard and stuff, and I'm just dying. What are you doing with your movement phase? What are you doing with this charge phase? Oh, I'm trying to shoot stuff. Why? What do Guard kill in the shooting phase? Well, they might kill 3 guardsmen, 4 pure guardsmen. Okay, so why are you worried about that phase over the charge phase and the combat phase and the pile-ins and like, for example, if you've got Custodian Guard reroll wounds if you control an objective, and you always check the control at the start of the phase, start of any phase, right?
Yeah.
So if you are playing Guard,
start of any phase,
yeah. So if you're playing Guard and you run them into the middle, not near an objective, and they get hammered, you're playing them wrong. They are objective flippers. They are defensive flippers. Whatever it might be, but you have to make sure you obsec the guy, put your opponent off it, get your reroll wounds, and they become infinitely better. And it's those mechanics there that you're playing within the rules of the game. You're playing within the faction. You're playing within the index, and you will see a much better, much more improved way of playing.
I mean, I think it comes down to... I think you're right. It's about knowing around the movement and about doing all the movement. Because, in other words, Custodes are one of those factions that rely so heavily on setup, getting yourself in a position that then you can execute a match-winning moves.
Yes.
Right? A lot of other factions on just getting a tank to get an angle.
Yep.
Or getting enough lines or enough bodies on an objective to survive.
Yep.
Right. I mean, every faction's got their own playstyle, but I think you're right in terms of knowing you've got to know what each data slate does down to a T, but also the role it has. And as we've only got quite a few good data slates, it's quite an easy thing to do. What the difficult thing to do is then to put that into practice.
Yeah, 100%.
It's like it's like, for example, some people don't agree with our position of Alaris,
Yeah.
right? So then we're looking at Alaris, and you're saying, right? I had one person say to me, "Oh, but you know, John Lennon had loads of Venatari and was rapid ingressing them in WTC or something." So when I say about that's teams, so they can put him into someone that's got no screen.
Exactly.
And then I turned around and said, how are you going to win that battle, win that game against someone who can screen you out?
Yep.
I mean, how are you going to do that? And after a little bit of conversation, it worked out that we haven't actually had that matchup. And in my experience, I have had matchups where I've been screened out and I've just been sat there thinking, how am I going to get 15 points, 20 points on my last turn to win the game?
Yep.
And my Alaris or my whoever I did in rapid ingress is so far back that I'm going to have to roll ridiculously well on an advance to get onto an objective to win.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you are kind of really constraining how you're going to play by placing units into rapid ingress or using units that are having rapid ingress. Same with Deep Strike. Deep Strike is immensely important, which is why a lot of factions are able to screen it out.
Mm-hmm.
So as a Custodes player, I think my advice would be have a game plan centered around multiple avenues. I mean, how many times have I gone to a table and looked at a table and I've seen a Custodes player set out?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking to myself, I know exactly what he's going to do. It's simple as anything. I know exactly what he's going to do. I look at his Deep Strike and he's got 800 points in Deep Strike.
Yep.
Or something. And if I know what he's going to do, yes, I play Custodes. But if the opponent has any idea about who Custodes are, they're going to know exactly what they're going to do. But I don't want to trumpet on about any specific data sheets here. But the Coronis, or indeed any kind of transport we have, such for example the Land Raider, what that means is at the LGT in Game 5, I was playing against Gene Stealer Cults. Yep. We were both 3-1, both lost to Eldar, I think it was, or I think he'd actually lost to Manny. Right. With his cultist spam, I think it was. And we were playing, and we sat down. He goes, "Okay, so what have you got in Deep Strike?" I said, "Oh, nothing." And he looked at me. He's like, "What?" I said, "Nothing. I've got 5 Sagitarium, 3 Venatari in the
Coronis.
I'm going to start all 10 Woodens on the board." And I think he was just a bit like, "Oh." So I think when we flip it back, it's kind of like, if I needed to put it into Deep Strike, it's there. I don't need to put stuff in the Coronis. I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
But if I needed to use the Coronis, it was there.
Yeah.
And it gave me that option to go down another route, and I had the teeth with the reroll wounds and the Sag. So it's about thinking outside of, when I see on Reddit all of these, please look at my lists, and it's 4 blobs of units, mm-hmm. which are the majority of the points, with a few tweaks here or there, maybe a dread or something. Mm-hmm. And I'm sat there and I'm thinking, that's 4 threats. Yep. You should have 5, 6, or 7 threats as a custodian army. Go for much smaller units. Go for smaller units with more teeth. It's a difficult one because smaller units means more targets of opportunity. It also means that if you lose one guy in a smaller unit, you get gimped. Yep. So, I mean, I'd certainly test moving away from blobs, and I think that's where the future of the faction, until our codex drops, comes. And then when the codex drops, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But I think at the moment, every time I've seen a successful Custodes list, one that's doing really well, it's at least now 20 bodies, and it's at least probably I would say 5 or 6 threats that are good enough to take an objective, a fortified objective. When I say fortified, I mean 300-400 points worth of.
Yeah, fine. Interesting. So, I think that's a real fair and interesting point, and this is one of our fundamental differences in play. And it applies not just to Custodes, but to other armies. And it's have a game plan, but don't stick to the game plan at all costs. Understand what you're playing into. Like your point about Deep Strike, when I play CSM, I put like 800 points into Deep Strike or Strat Reserve because I need to get certain angles and stuff. And I find myself going, well, why am I doing that? The guy's got no shooting, so he can't hit my Forge Fiend, he can't hit this, he can't hit that. It's the same thing with Custodes. Things can Deep Strike, they don't have to Deep Strike. If they can start on the field and they can still do what they need to do, then they should. Like, I think Custodes have so little room to come back from a bad turn 1, turn 2. And by bad, I mean you've lost 800 points. Like, if you've lost your scoring units, that's really, really hard for Custodes.
Yeah. If you take a hit, if you take a bad hit as a Custodes, you can't really get back up. I mean, how many times have I heard people say, "Oh, it's a forgiving army"?
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's a forgiving army. It's actually not at all, because if you get hit hard and your dice rolls don't get you out of dodge, which is always a 50-50, then it's game over. I mean, how many times have for example, a blitz dropped on a squad of mine, and I'm thinking to myself, if they kill my entire squad here, this is game over. And I've been handed 4 or 5 saves to make. I'm thinking, crap. And like a Wraith Guard unit has gone, right, okay, you've moved, so I'm going to Overwatch. Oh, I'm going to, Fate Dice a 6. My Spirit Seer is going to make a 6. Next thing I know is I'm thinking, if I don't make these saves, I'm not going to kill that unit. And it's game over.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
And whereas another army would go, it's okay because I've got much more assets because my assets cost far less.
100%. I think you're right. I've heard people talking about forgiving army. I've heard them talk about even, and apologies, like this beginner friendly army, and the kind of one of the problems I think with Custodes, one of the big problems with Custodes at the moment is the secondary play is inconsistent. I don't know of a way of taking fixed secondaries being Custodes.
Neither do I.
Tell me. I was going to say, tell me I'm wrong here, because I think this is one, and we've discussed this a couple of times about a top level competitive list has to be able to take fixed secondaries, and Custodes can't, which means you're always rolling the dice based on your cards.
I mean, we can, but it means we need to invest significantly more points in throwaway units, and chaff sisters mainly. And you probably need 2 assassins rather than 1 and an inquisitor.
But even then, that won't guarantee a deploy. Let's say you take a kill one, let's say you take assassinate or whatever it might be. If you've got a unit of sisters, let's say you've got 2 units of sisters in a rhino behind cover, drop one out, so that's deployed for 2 turns. The assassin gets it for the 3rd turn. You're still not going to guarantee it for turn 4, turn 5.
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult one because you would kind of hope that your Custodes would have made space for you.
Yeah,
but
true.
I mean, ideally it would be fixed, which is kind of non-interactive. So it would be something like a deploy and behind enemy lines, deploy and cleanse, or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is probably even worse. But then, obviously, if your opponent gives you targets of opportunity, i.e. assassinate or bring it down, you would do that.
Yeah.
So say, for example, if you were going into Tau and he had a blob of crisis suits, you would go, right, I'm going to do bring it down.
Yes, of course.
They're all vehicles, yeah. So I think it's a difficult one. But I think you're absolutely right. If we end up going down the route of investing far more points into those chaff units, then our opponent's just going to go back and say, right, this Custodes guy is just chosen fixed.
Yep.
If I kill his chaff, he's going to have to deploy teleport homers with a 300-point unit.
Yep.
I'm happy to do that because he'll just go and score his own points and he won't need to worry about me, because unless I'm doing that action, I'm not going to get any points, and it doesn't matter if I wipe him, I'm just not going to keep up with him.
Yeah.
So we lose out on points that way. So what we're best at is being oppressive very quickly, controlling one or two middle objectives, but also getting into the opponent's battle very quickly through advance and charge. And I find that if I can get that in place, I can limit my opponent's scoring to such a degree that it doesn't matter if I'm choosing tactical, because it doesn't matter if I pulled shocking cards, because I've got so far ahead on primary. And I will chip away at secondary, even if it's bad cards. I'll still chip away. I'll have limited them so much. It's like when we played at our little kind of Christmas Wild Boys RTT thing, and I played Sam with I was running Grey Knights, but when I got into his backfield, he had no way to score points, and I was just so far ahead. And I think that's more so for Custodes, far more for Custodes, because we don't have maneuverability, we don't have the kind of like the way to score points that a lot of people would. If we're playing an Eldar, you know that if they take fixed with behind enemy lines, every turn you're going to have 2 squads in your deployment. And you've got no way to stop that. So you know they're going to max that. And if they've got deploy, chances are they're going to be doing it in your home object, in your deployment zone. So they're going to max that. So you know that you can't kill them quick enough, and if you do, they've just got so many cheap units compared to you. You know, they're not going to give you all the units to kill at once. They're going to drip feed in and score points slowly.
Got it.
You need to then think, I need to control primary, and then you look up and you see a squad of a blob of 10 Wraith Guard coming in, or the Avatar, or the Yinkan. And then you've got to think, right, okay, how do I deal with that while still chipping away here? And the answer has got to be tactical, because they will stop you scoring fixed. So you have to then choose tactical, and it literally comes down to not only having good luck with dice, but then having good luck with cards.
Yes. Interesting. How many? Again, we're talking averages here. But on average, what is your winning points score? So when you win, how many points are you getting? Because I think a lot of people.
Let me open the app.
Yeah. While you get open the app, because I think a lot of people will go, "Oh, it can't score 100 points; it's useless." Or it can't score 95 points; it's useless. But as the point that you're trying to say, that is, you win a game by stopping the other person scoring as well as you scoring, etc., etc., etc. And so I was just interested to know what are you winning by? What is your number of points? Is it an 85? Is it an 82? What's that look like?
Okay, so my go first win rate is 86.7, and my go second is 77.8.
That's quite a big difference.
And my average victory points for my wins is 89.86.
Oh wow, that's actually higher
My
than
losses. Yeah, it's not bad. But my losses is 70.5.
Wow, that's much higher than I thought it would be.
But I've had a couple of high losses, which have really helped me out with that kind of average.
Interesting. Okay, I feel like we're fizzling out, and it's going to be a good place to kind of stop. But I kind of want final thoughts on this, like Custodes. Well, let you sum up your thoughts on this. Are Custodes a challenging army to play? Yes or no, and then final thoughts, I guess.
I would say that's a good question, and I would say yes, they are a challenging army to play. I think it's negated and kind of impacted in people's eyes because of the low model count and the low number of data sheets.
Yep.
So it's not as much to remember. So we don't have as many characters, overlapping buffs, stratagems, different data sheets, because every data sheet has its own ability now. So in that regard, we're much simpler to play.
Yep.
Actually, on the tabletop, with the movement, the how we utilize our units, how we move our units, what units we throw in, and how we then make sure we can take that hit, we are far more complex than most factions.
Mm-hmm.
Because if a guard unit, if a guard commander or a guard player throws a tank commander and 2 squads of infantry in, who cares? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas if we throw a squad of wardens in, if we lose that squad, that's probably an entire side of the board that's just gone. So we're very more nuanced, much more complex than people, I think, understand around Custodes.
Yeah.
What about you?
So I think you summed it up probably more succinctly and better than I could. But I think there is a perception with Custodes that they're a beginner-friendly army because people have either started with Custodes like we did, or they jumped on the Custodes bandwagon, realised it's cheap and easy and quick to buy, and then spammed the latest hotness. I think to play Custodes well, and I do mean well, I don't mean averagely, I don't mean, you get 2, 3 or 3-2, I'm talking about you're sitting there and you're competing for that top table, that top final spot, is a huge skill gap. And like you were saying, and like you were summing up nicely, it's about where the trade comes. It's about where you commit. It's about at what point do you put in. One thing about, say, your style of play is you will usually have an asset, or more than one asset, available in T5, turn 5. Whereas I would play Haymakery and be all or nothing by turn 3 type thing. Like, it's a understanding the fundamentals. If you're losing your stuff too quickly, it's not an army problem, it's a you problem. And I've had to come to terms with that quite a few times. But if you are sitting there and you're struggling and you're going, I thought it was an easy army to pick up, it is, and it's an easy army to play at a certain level, but to get the best out of it, to get the most out of it. And I think you can still get the most out of it. You can take it to an RTT and win the RTT. Bit of luck getting cards, bit of luck getting your matchups, whatever. It's not a dead faction, but it might be wrong in many people's eyes. I think it requires a level of skill that is deceptive to most people, me included. There's a reason I put it down for a while. I can't get the best out of it with my style, with how I like to play.
I think your style's really effective into a vehicle meta.
Oh yeah,
which is where we're going. So I think if you were to kind of come back into it, you would, I think.
Well, I'm really excited by the codex because it gives me back different options. I think where it is at the moment and it's inventory heavy spam, that just isn't my style. It isn't how my brain works. It isn't how I want to try and build. And I've got ideas and sort of casual games and stuff, but I think the codex comes back out and Custodes gets so much more interesting for me for different styles. But yeah, that's it really. That's all I want to kind of sum up with. It's if you are struggling,
it's great.
Yeah, if you are struggling, you post in comments. Let's chat about things, let's chat about lists and whatever. But maybe think about it's your style of play. It won't necessarily be your list. It won't necessarily be you've got Alaris and Wardens. You've got all the bits and pieces we talk about. What more can you do? How do you get your primary? How do you get your secondary? How do you think about the game? I think that'd be a useful piece of advice.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to do is I've got an RTT on the 20th.
Yep.
So next week we're going to do. We kind of wanted to see if the data slate would drop. So next week we're going to do a kind of list build.
Yes.
With the data slate, hopefully. If not, then obviously without it. But the whole principle would be that we would build a list, and then I'd run it at the RTT, and then we'd obviously kind of look at the feedback around it and kind of what worked, what didn't work, blah blah blah. But I think it's exactly as Ollie said. If you're a new player, don't be disheartened, or if you're an existing or like a long-term Custodes player, don't feel disheartened by maybe a run of bad results or a string of bad results.
Yep.
We are in a really kind of weird place as a faction. We're kind of in limbo, but at the same point, there are ways and tools. We're not just waiting here for our codex.
No.
There are ways and tools for you to use and enjoy your games up until that point.
100%.
And it's about we're going on a journey with this War in the Webway YouTube channel. Follow it with us, and yeah, hopefully we can help.
Sounds good. All right, that's me done.
And me, I blabbered quite a lot there. So yes, thanks very much for listening, everyone. If you're here again at the end, we really do appreciate it, and we really do appreciate all the support. There's been a lot of it, which is fantastic. Please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. Helps us out, and yeah, we will catch you again soon.
Catch you again soon. See you later, guys.
Cheers, guys.